Childhood Cancer Perspective. Thank you again for sticking with me through these episodes as I continue to talk about the journey, the trials, and tribulations of being diagnosed with pediatric cancer from a father's point of view. Of course, I've had my daughter and my wife on this as well, and I hope to have other guests with me at some point to be able to talk about other sides of that. But right now, you're getting a parent's perspective on pediatric cancer. I've talked about this before, how it is absolutely a family diagnosis. It is not something that is just the child that is being diagnosed. Everybody is affected in their own way, and that is what I'm hoping that we can get more side to the story when it comes to my daughters and my wife, as well as I've got several other people that I want to bring on live that would be able to speak about their experiences with it and how it's affected them either directly or indirectly. Today, what I would like to discuss is something that was very, very prominent and very much considered the last ditch effort for JC, and it can be considered the last ditch effort in treatments for so many people, and that is your stem cell transplant. Normally, when it comes to stem cell transplants, they're wanting you to be either as far along in the chemo process as you can get, as far along in treatments, immunotherapies as you can possibly be before they do a stem cell transplant. Now, we did ask the question not too long ago, actually, about why they wouldn't do it first, because the stem cell transplant, on its basic level, is meant to completely take your body, your blood counts, your immunity down to zero. You are basically a sitting duck for any type of germs or anything that comes in your way. That's what it does. It takes you down to zero so that your body can then build up that immunity again with strong, healthy cells. And that is the hope, to basically take over whatever cancer is left in your body, because now you have gotten rid of any type of weak cells or broken cells. You've got a new strong army of cells that are going to come in and they're going to take over and help you recover that much faster. That is the hope when it comes to stem cell transplants. And I don't think people understand too much about what exactly happens during that stem cell transplant process. So I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. I'm going to do it from memory. Obviously, I went through this with my daughter. My family went through this. But what happens first? Like I said, you have to go through as much as you can with your chemo treatments. And at some point, we're going to decide that these chemo treatments have gotten us as far as they're going to get us. They are not going to benefit us anymore from continuing to go through it. We need to move on to something stronger and more powerful, and we're going to do our best to beat this cancer over the head, for lack of a better way to put it. So when it is decided that the stem cell transplant is going to happen, you are then sent to the hospital. Now, for us, it was Milwaukee, so we were 2 hours away. And that meant we were going to have to go out there and stay for 2 or 3 days so that she could do all her preliminary testing. This includes testing her heart, testing her lungs, testing on a base level everything in her body to make sure that she's strong enough to go through this process, make sure that her body is strong enough to go through the process that is going to take a lot out of her. Um, Now, what happens is that with like the echocardiograms and with a lung test, if you've ever seen one, it's basically you're put in a plexiglass block a box, and you are meant to blow out as hard as you can, and they time it to see that your lungs are strong enough, because these drugs, when they're put into you, they are tough, and it does put you through a lot, and so they're trying to make sure that your body is going to be 100% strong enough to get through this. So we went out that for that us particularly, we went out to Milwaukee. My JC and then my other daughter Maya, they went with me to keep her company. We went out to Milwaukee. We were there for 2 days. They did all of her testing in one day. It was a full day. We literally got there, I think, at 7 o'clock in the morning. They start off it with IVs. They take blood work. They get you ready, and you're going to be circling that hospital all day, doing reading to every different floor to make sure that you can get all the testing in so that they can sign you off on being able to do your stem cell transplant. So they get you through all of that. And once it's proven that you're doing well and things are good, what they're going to do, if you're healthy enough, is they're going to bring you in for the actual collection or your personal donation. So JC is going to be donating her own cells, um, that they will then her healthy cells that they will then take out of her body. They will store those cryogenically. They will store these cells, and then they will put them back into her body during her stem cell transplant. So that day, to actually extract the cells from her body, is an entire day. It is a morning to night. It is an 8 to 5 job to do it, and it's boring. Literally for her, what happens is she's set up in the bed. They hook up the machine to her, and then it starts running, and it runs all day until they get enough cells that they believe are going to be ready for her to reintroduce them into her body during her transplant. Now, I don't recall the exact amount of cells that they want to get, but she donated when she did her transplant. She donated, I think, at least double, if not more, than what was necessary. And we got that information within within hours. Once everything was done, they actually called my wife here at home, and they told her, and she called us and said she donated everything she needed to do. She's ready to go. We will get everything set up and go from there. Now, because of timing and her birthday and the holidays and all that kind of stuff, we didn't want to do this where she was going to be in the hospital for those times. We wanted her to be able to enjoy herself through the holidays, um, enjoy her birthday, and not have to worry about doing this because she was going to be away from home. Now, when you talk about these treatments, the stem cell transplants, you are going to be in the hospital for at a minimum 6 to 8 weeks. That's a minimum, and it could be longer, it could be shorter, but that 6 to 8 weeks is a pretty average time you're going to be there. So that means you're going to be separated from your family. It's going to be you and one parent, two parents if you don't have any other kids or responsibilities. But for us, it was just me and JC. Now, she was scheduled to go in actually on the 18th of February in 2021. She was scheduled to go in um, for her stem cell transplant. We were ready to go. We actually had a date set. We actually had the mayor of Appleton here create a JC Strong Day and declare it a JC Strong Day to celebrate her going to do this, celebrate her birthday. Kind of this is your final lap. You're going to get this done. This is going to solve everything. And then a lot of thought behind stem cell transplants is that's your ace in the hole. That's the golden ticket to beating this, because you are going to essentially remove your body of all the bad stuff, put only the good stuff back in, and hopefully that just regenerates in your body and creates this big, strong, healthy person again. But anyway, we were scheduled to go in on the 18th, and on her birthday, she was actually feeling really bad. She wasn't feeling good, um, and just overall felt like crap. We ended up going to the hospital, and they thought she's got low blood sugar. So they said, okay, you need to, get some energy into you, and we'll see what we'll kind of play it by ear. So we spent her birthday essentially in the hospital. Came home, and it didn't seem to really be getting any better, and she was still feeling like shit. So we ended up having to um, go back to the hospital in Green Bay because she wasn't able to eat. She wasn't getting the medicine that she needed. Her body just she was just feeling like garbage. We ended up checking in and staying overnight. And when she woke up in the morning, like, she was actually feeling better, and then in the morning she woke up when we were in Green Bay. She woke up and she could not communicate. She couldn't speak. She couldn't. It was like she was trying to get words out. Like, she was trying to learn how to talk again, and she could not say anything. She couldn't communicate. It was very scary, but she was alert. She was alert to what was going on, but she just couldn't do it. It was almost like she had had a seizure or a stroke or something along those lines, and we couldn't figure it out. And they came in. We tried to figure it out. We tried to talk about it. Child Life came in, and they sat with her for a while, and they were trying to calm her down and things like that. And then um, it was decided, like, okay, we've spoken to Milwaukee. We've spoken to your team. Now, this was a few days early. We were not supposed to be out there yet. We've spoken to your team, and they want you to come to Milwaukee now. They want you to get out there now. So we've got two options. One, we ambulance you from Green Bay to Milwaukee, or two, you take her home, you get your stuff, and you head out there. Well, we opted just to go home. We were home long enough for me to shower. My wife had actually packed my bags while I was on the way home. And then we loaded up in the car and we headed to Milwaukee. And we were actually supposed to check in the emergency department. so that they could get her vitals and everything like that. And we got checked in, and we got up to a room, and we were in actually in the emergency room for a little while, for a couple hours actually, because they were trying to get her room ready. They were trying to get testing. They actually wanted to COVID test her again, which I talked them out of because she had already been COVID tested the day before. And it was very traumatic for her at that point. And you can imagine with these kids that all these doctors now are in these freaking ET space suits, and it's very scary. Um, and so we talked them out of that because it wasn't necessary, because she had been tested literally a day prior. And so we were able to do that. And throughout the time of us sitting in the emergency room, she started to feel better. She was able to talk to me. She was able to communicate. Things were getting better. It was like she was coming back around. And it was just a very strange thing that happened. But after that, it seemed to be okay. So anyway, we're admitted. We're admitted to the hospital at that point. We got into her room upstairs. It's called the hot unit, and that's where they do all the stem cell transplants. These are kids that are literally cut off from the rest of the hospital, not interacting with the rest of the hospital, because they are there doing these treatments that are going to take their bodies to absolute zero. So they can't be involved or around a lot of people. Um, and so they're cut off. That's where they are. That's where these transplants happen. Now they do a very good job of making these children feel at home. They let them decorate the rooms. They give them paint pens so they can decorate on the windows. Like, they really make it feel not so scary, at the same time knowing it's a scary place and you're going to be here for a while. So unfortunately, that was going to be our home for the next 40 days. JC and I spent 40 days in the hospital, three different rooms, because they switch your rooms every 10 to 12 days. And just when you get comfortable in one, they move you to another one. And it was a very up and down experience, I think, for JC and I. It was a long, long time. 40 days is a long time. And when you think about that, being separated from the rest of your family, from your other children, from your spouse, it's a lot to take in. And the only thing you have is those four walls and each other. Now, JC and I absolutely became closer during this time. We actually absolutely learned what each other needed to get through this, because as much as she was going through this, I was going through a lot too, because it was a lot for me to handle by myself. Because we couldn't have both parents there, because number one, it wasn't, with restrictions, it wouldn't be allowed, and number two, we have two other children that needed to be cared for and taken care of. So my wife stayed with them, and I was in the hospital with JC. Um, but the day-to-day life for us in that situation was, it was up and down. Sometimes it was really good, and we made the best of it. She loved her YouTube. She was if she had We had a Roku that we actually brought with us, because that was something that was gifted to us in Green Bay. And so she had a Roku, and that was the first thing that needed to be set up when we got there, and she knew that. And she had the remote with her, and she would turn on videos, and the TV would stay on 24/7, because it would help her sleep. It would help her relax. She could watch, certain things that she liked to watch with her sisters, but on day to day, they had a teacher that would come in, and she wasn't really into school when she was in the hospital during this. It was not something that her mind would really allow. She just didn't want to do it. So that was something that was very difficult to get her to do, and unfortunately, she didn't really do a lot of it this time around, which was okay. I didn't really care. I just wanted to focus on her getting better. But during the beginning of the stay, she would have to go through 30 rounds. Now, 30 rounds of high dose chemo. And when I say high dose chemo, it is 30 rounds in just a few days. And that 30 rounds of chemo is meant to just drain your body of anything, meant to just bulldoze and steamroll any type of cells, healthy or otherwise, out of your body. And just basically, you're at zero. You are an empty bottle at that point, and this whole thing was going to build you back up. But it's very, very tough. These high dose chemos, when I say they drain you of everything, it's not just the cells. It gets something called mucositis, which is literally the lining of your mouth and your esophagus. It is literally stripped away because of these drugs, which means you have mouth sores. Your inside, it hurts to eat, it hurts to drink, it hurts to talk, and it's terrible. And she also developed C. diff, which if anybody knows what that is, it is serious and it is highly contagious. So once you develop C. diff, you are basically quarantined. So we were quarantined essentially most of the time that we were there. Now she was. I could leave the room as long as I was, washing my hands and using hand sanitizer and stuff like that. But I could leave the room. She couldn't. She was in there because normally what would happen is um, they had it set up where you could take walks around. You can get out and leave your room. You put her in a wheelchair, and every now and again we would just kind of circle the building, just kind of get her out of the room. Or there was a gaming system outside of our room where they could sit and play games. But unfortunately, when you develop C. diff, that's it. You're in your room and you've got to stay in there. It's just it sucks, but it is what it is. But that was kind of a side effect of these chemos. Another side effect was she had to take 3 baths a day, I think, for 10 days. Um, and it was something because one of the chemo drugs, and it's the only chemo drug out there that excretes through your pores. And if you don't wash it off or you don't regularly clean your body, it will actually burn your skin. Which a lot of times you're really starting to think in your mind, like they're the things that we're told as parents to be careful of with our kids when they're going through this is make sure you don't touch their their um, their feces or their urine. Make sure you don't touch their body fluids. Make sure that you're washing your hands regularly because everything that's excreted in that stuff can hurt you and burn you. And you're thinking to yourself, how in the hell is that something that we should be focused on when this stuff that you're saying could hurt us is literally going through their tiny bodies? So it's very hard to grasp, very hard to hold on to. And when they say that they have to be cleaned 3 times a day because this drug excretes through the pores and it can burn their skin. But what's it doing on the inside of their body? I don't know. But that in itself is a scary thing. So 3 times a day, we did it in the morning, we did it in the afternoon, we did it at nighttime. She had to take a bath. And she didn't mind it too much, but she also was very drained and very out of it because this stuff just it really rocks you to the core. And so we would take these baths 3 times a day. And we had a very, very awesome nurse that actually made her a bath chart, and she was able to put stickers on every time she did it. Was so, like I said, they made it as fun as they could for those situations because it's very difficult going through this and being away from everything that you know and you love and understand. And so they made it very easy for her. And these were actually nurses that we met that I really wish we would be able to stay in connection with. And I stayed in connection with a few of them, but they do an incredible job. And we only met in the time that I was there during this and another time I'll talk about. We only met two that I disallowed from being into our room because of their attitudes. But otherwise, they were very, very calming to her, and they were very um, uh, caring. And when she was going through something, they made her understand exactly what was happening and that none of it was her fault. Which and I've talked about that in a past episode where these kids really often think about things as being their fault. But I digress. So once those drugs are done, once those chemos are done, and they're allowed to kind of get through their system, and they can test to see, yes, she is at a zero ANC, which is your blood counts, and what that's at zero. Now it's time for the stem cell transplant. Now, what happens is then she's hooked up. All these cells are reintroduced to her body, and then it's a waiting game, and it is literally a waiting game. And they would come in the middle of the night every night after these stem cells were done. And I will also tell you something that we joke about if you follow our other social media. It smells like cream corn. They smell like cream corn. It's the additives that are in the stuff, the preservatives for the stem cells. But it smells like cream corn. It's a very odd thing. Needless to say, that is a trigger for me. I've talked about triggers in the past. Cream corn smell is a trigger for me. I cannot do it anymore. But so they put that in, and then it's a waiting game. And then in the middle of the night, they would come in every single night, and they would draw blood. Now she had a port, so they didn't have to stick her with a needle, but they would just draw. And most of the time, she wouldn't even wake up. So they have to draw blood every night. And about 6 in the morning, I had an app on my phone that it would all the test results would pop up. So about 6 in the morning every day, I would get her an alert, telling me that the test results were in. And every single day, um, you wait to see that number go from 0 and go up. And you're hoping, because if it goes up and it's starting to move up, that means that the cells are taking, and that's a positive. The longer it stays at 0, you run the risk of graft versus host disease, or you also run the risk of the stem cells just not working. And it just, unfortunately, they can do, that's something that you'd have to kind of look into more, but they can do them again, and they can also get donated cells from other people, but obviously the best ones are yours. So every day in that time, and I would see them, and they would slow. They were slow, and they were slow, and they were slow, but they were going up, and they were going up very quick, quicker than they had expected them to go up. And I remember when the doctors would come in, I would say, okay, they're at point 0.0001. I'm so excited because that means it's not at 0. That means they're starting to move. And she actually was doing really well. And yeah, I would start to ask, how long do we have to be in here? Like, what is your goal for her to be at before we leave? And there's no real set number. It's just that you see that those numbers are moving up, that she's feeling good, that she's getting out of bed, that she's being responsive, that she's not having a bad reaction to it, and that we can and they will start to then wean her off of certain drugs and certain medications, and so that you can be at home. Um, the biggest medication she was on was morphine at that time, and that was because of the mouth sores from the mucositis. She had a button where she could push it if it hurt because it was very sore to her. And the C. diff wasn't really painful; it was just kind of a pain in the ass. And the real side of it is it would give her diarrhea, and that was just, it was what it was, and it didn't, that didn't hurt her. It was just annoying. Um, but she overall, her attitude was pretty well when we were in there going through this. And when we got to the point where they said, "Okay, we're going to send you home," and it was great. We were so excited because of 40 days of her and I being in that room together, and just, really, going through times when it was really happy, going through times when she was just really, really sad, and sometimes she'd want me to lay in bed with her, and she'd say, "I'm sad, but I don't," or, "I'm sad, but I don't know why." Or, "I just want to go home. I'm scared." I mean, she had plenty of those times, in addition to being in a good mood. If we would sit down and we would do her beads, her courage beads, or if we would her beads of courage, or if we would color sometimes, or we would do crafts, just to kind of keep her busy. And but a lot of times she just wanted to be by herself, and these drugs that she was on, these medications, would make her sleepy. So a lot of the times going through this, she would sleep. And when she would fall asleep for lunch, that's when I would go downstairs and get lunch, and she'd fall asleep for dinner. That's when I'd go get dinner. But otherwise, I was with her the whole entire time. I never left her side. And going through this by yourself in that situation is very, very difficult because you don't have people to bounce ideas off of. You don't have people to take your mind off of what's going on. You're doing the best you can to really make the best out of a bad situation. And that bad situation is cancer. And but at the same time, it's supposed to be a good situation because you're hoping that this is going to be the key. This stem cell transplant is going to be the key to her recovery, and that's what you're hoping for. And you never really know what's going to happen, but we hope that that's the case. And so there's a lot of details about this stem cell transplant. The way that she felt, the way that she interacted with everybody. She did really well, but at the same time, it was a very trying time for us to be in there. And it got very lonely for both of us. I mean, obviously we had each other, but for me to be away from my wife and for her to be away from her sisters, which was very hard for her, um, it was it was not good. She loved to FaceTime with them. She would call them when they were in school and they couldn't answer, and she would get upset about that. But she loved to FaceTime with them and just be there on the phone, even if they didn't talk. She just wanted to be there. But all in all, the stem cells took. They did. She took off really well. Her ANC went up, which was fantastic. Her blood counts went up. It was great, and we were able to then come home. And in hindsight, I wish we would have just stayed for a couple more days because when we had to actually go back 2 days later for a checkup. They were gonna draw our blood. They were gonna test everything to see if the blood counts were up. They were just gonna kind of keep moving forward and seeing if how we were doing. We got to the room on that day, and we're just sitting there, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. She was actually we were taking pictures and smiling for something for her for school, and then all of a sudden she just started to feel really weird, and just kind of got to the point where she was again being unresponsive, not like passed out, but just not being able to interact with what you're doing. She couldn't control her hands. She just kind of laid down, and then she was just kind of she would look in your eyes, but it was like there was nobody there. And I kept asking her, "You okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And she was trying to cry, but she couldn't. It was very scary. And then the doctors came in, and she's laying there, and at that point, it kind of just seemed like she was ignoring them. And then it got to the point where it was, when they came in again, I said, "Listen, she's not like something's not right here." And I wanted to leave because I said I don't want to put her through more testing. I just want to get her home. And then it's just like she got sick out of nowhere. But when she got sick, she didn't react. It like she just did it like she was standing up, looking at you, talking, and threw up, and then just no reaction. And it was very strange. And so we ended up trying to get her, get her into an MRI, and it didn't work out. It took forever. So they ended up admitting us, and she had what was called a focal seizure, and it's not the type of seizure you normally associate, with shaking or locking up of the limbs or something. She it literally like her she something just happened, like almost like a reset in her brain, and it just shut down, or like a short circuit. It's very scary, and because you can't really explain what's happening. And so what ended up happening is we were actually admitted for another 12 days, following that incident. So we had just got home from a 40-day stay and went back for, just a checkup, and we ended up being stuck in the hospital for another 12 days. Now, mind you, we had nothing. I was wearing the clothes that I was wearing. I had nothing with me. I didn't even have a phone charger at that point because I expected we were just going to be there and go back home. Um, so we're admitted, but when we were admitted, we were actually taken to the ICU because at that point she was literally, and if you follow my social media, there's pictures there, but she was literally like a zombie. Like if her eyes were open, there was nobody, there was nothing there. There was no communication. She could not speak. She couldn't speak or make any type of sounds or anything. She would every now and again, if you messed with her, like when they were messing with her incisions, which she actually had a shunt revision while we were in there because they determined that her shunt was not draining correctly. When they did that and actually went in, she could sense the pain and she reacted to it. But in general, trying to speak to her, she couldn't do it. And it was extremely scary. And I remember calling my wife when I was in there thinking, I don't think we're going to come home. I don't think she's going to come home because she was just basically there and almost like not brain dead, but just I thought she was in a coma for a couple of days because there was just nothing. And um, and they ended up never really figuring out exactly what happened, except that this seizure just kind of reset everything in her body, and it never it took a long time to come back. And on the last couple of days before we were able to go home, she started to interact more. She would turn and look at you, and she'd be able to get her hands to point at you and stuff like that. um, she said mom and one time, and then I couldn't get anything out of her for hours, and then she slowly more words would come out, slowly more interaction would come out, and finally, on that day we were finally able to go home, she was able to speak to me. It was like she was speak it wasn't 100% her, but she was speaking and conversing and stuff like that. And up until then, I really honestly didn't think that it was going to happen. I remember calling when I said I called my wife, I actually put the phone up to her. I said, "Here, talk to her, because I don't know if we're going to come home." I was scared, and I was alone there again. Luckily, we had another family that was a friend of ours that was going to be coming to Milwaukee for some follow-up testing with their daughter, and they were able to bring me clothes and things to change into because otherwise I would have just been there with what I had. Um, and it was we, on that 12th day we were able to finally come home again, and they sent us home because they thought, you know what, now's the time maybe to go home and just let let your home environment, let your family heal you, and let that opportunity to be around other people be your best medicine. And it turned out to be the best medicine for her, for us to be able to come home and be around everybody and just and get better. And she did. She actually, was doing really well, and ended up doing her stuff, for school and for church and things like that, and was doing really well and bouncing back. And so it was that, and that's the only those two times with her in Green Bay, and then that time happening here was the only two times that she ever had these focal seizures. And I don't know, there are side effects of types of drugs that she was on that can show that that's what it was, but it also could be the side effect of a shunt malfunction. It also could be the effects of the, um, unfortunately, the cancer and the leptomeningeal disease taking over her brain that was just causing these things to happen. Um, and the leptomeningeal disease is something that I'll talk about in another episode, because that's something that we discovered while we were in the hospital there for that second admission, the 12-day admission. We discovered that she actually had cancer cells washing over her body in there. It wasn't the the stem cell transplant. We went back for that 12th day. The stem cell transplant worked in the sense that the cells worked, the cells took over, the cells grew, they do what they were supposed to do, but the chemos didn't work. So we found out in that stay, in the second 12-day stay, that there were cancer cells in her blood, cancer cells or in her spinal fluid, and so the in a sense the chemos and stem cell transplant did not work. It was not successful because the cancer cells were still there, and they shouldn't be. Um, and I also want to state too that I guess I didn't say this before, that the high dose chemo, the purpose of it, yes, is to bulldoze everything, but the main purpose is that high dose chemo breaks the blood brain barrier. Which, just think about, at the base of your neck, just think that there's a board, and that the blood doesn't go any higher. Obviously, we know there's blood up there, but we know that it stops. Just like a wall. Consider that. There's no way that the chemos that you're putting into your body are going above that wall. So therefore, normal chemos don't ever affect the upstairs, the brain, the spinal fluid, that kind of stuff. So what they need to do is high dose will break that blood brain barrier and go up into the areas where it should be working, where she had her cancer, unless you're treated intrathecally, which is where they put a reservoir actually in, um, your brain or in your spine, where they can inject the chemo right in, so it goes right into that spinal fluid or that, CNS. So that's very technical, and that's something that we'll probably get into later. But all in all, I guess what I wanted to discuss today is that stem cell transplants are meant to really be that home run. They're really meant to be that last ditch effort, and to take everything that the chemo has done up until now, give it that final home run and knock it out of the park. And they work together as a collaboration, and therefore killing whatever cancers are in there and giving your body brand new healthy cells so that they can then turn around and rebuild, and rebuild that body and rebuild your army inside of yourself to help fight off whatever may come your way. And if there's some cancer cells left, your hope is that those new ones that you put in are going to take care of it. um, the success rates, are up and down. Sorry, the success rates are depending on, the type of cancer, and the progression of your cancer, things like that. We've had several families that have had multiple stem cell transplants because they don't work. They're also known as bone marrow transplants. um, it just depends. It depends on the body. It depends on the progression. It depends on the type. And for JC, it was technically successful because the counts rose. And she didn't end up with graft versus host disease, where it's essentially um, the stem cells, they're attacked by your body attacks them. It's a collision. It's a war inside your body because it's a foreign substance, even though it's your own cells. She didn't develop that, and she didn't never develop new blood cells. It's so they grew. They did what they were supposed to do. But unfortunately, the cancer in her case was too far along, and then with the development of leptomeningeal disease, which again I will talk about that in another episode. You can look it up if you want, but that is just literally the cancer cells are flush within the CNS fluid, and therefore, if you the CNS fluid, that just washes over your entire body. It's washing over the brain, the spine. Therefore, that means that those cancer cells were just being deposited everywhere in her body, and it became too much for it to handle. So no amount of stem cell was going to fix that. And that's a whole nother episode as well, talking about the way she was treated and how we think that it should have been done differently. through the possibility of intrathecal chemos or other types of immunotherapies that we didn't have the option. And we'll go over those at some point as well, because that's something that makes a big difference in how your child is treated. And I urge you, if you're listening to this, to always explore your options. You may not have the options available to you, at least where you are, but you always have the option to check into them and get second opinions and do your research. I know as cancer parents that you're doing your research. I know that Google is life. I know that's what you're doing and I understand it. Make sure you don't burn yourself out on it, but make sure you also are always getting those opinions and never be afraid to ask questions. And also, as I close this today, just remember that when you're in the room with your child and your doctor, you are your doctor's only patient at that point. Where they have to be in the next 10 minutes is of no relevance to you. It doesn't matter. You're the only one there. You're the only patient they have. You make sure they stay in there to answer as many questions as you have and never be afraid to answer those questions. You're in control. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me. This has been kind of a longer episode, but I'm going to do more on the leptomeningeal disease, more on her types of shunts that she had, and I will be also hopefully doing an interview with a child life specialist that was very special to JC. I'm going to do an episode with my wife very soon. We were going to do it yesterday, didn't work out, and I'm going to get my daughter back in here. I've got all the mics set up. I know she wants to get involved and kind of speak about her experiences as she's getting closer to being the only child in the house again, as my daughter's getting ready to go to college. So I thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I'm going to keep posting these episodes as long as you're listening to them. And always, if you have ideas, please put them out there. Please post them in the comments. Send them to my social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, where you can find me everywhere. Get a hold of me. Let me know if there's something that you'd like me to talk about, or if you have a specific question about the treatments that we went through or our journey, and we'd love to talk about it. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.